Morning, everyone. So this month, we've been talking about wisdom. We spent the entire month profiling Solomon. And if you've joined us, I'll kind of like, if you just joined us this morning, I'll kind of like briefly summarize what we talked about. But this month, we've talked about just the incredible wisdom that was given to Solomon, and just how much of an impact it had on his life, it had on his kingdom, it had in the entire nation of Israel. And so I actually want to start with the verse that we started off the first Sunday, which you can find in 1 Kings 11, 42 through 43. It should be up on the screen. It just says, "And that time, and the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father. And Rehoboam his son reigned in his place." So at the end of Solomon's life, he returns just as he was made with his fathers. In his book Outliers, if any of you have heard of Outliers before, it's a book by Malcolm Gladwell. So Malcolm Gladwell is a Washington Post and the New Yorker writer who has become subsequently very popular in our generation. He's written about 5 books: The Tipping Point, Blink, Outliers, What the Dog Saw, and his new book, David and Goliath. So Malcolm Gladwell has become incredibly popular because what he does is he breaks down simple concepts and writes them in a very entertaining way. And so if you have, I've read Blink. If you haven't read Blink, I highly recommend it. Oh, I should say, word of caution, Gladwell did not call me and ask me to promote his books. We're not affiliated, this church is not affiliated with any particular author, so I just wanted to throw that out there. I was not paid for this. So in his book Outliers, Gladwell, he profiles highly successful people, and he kind of challenges us on what we think of when we think of successful people. We all have this notion of how someone becomes successful and how they stay successful. So he kind of profiles that. He looks at your typical Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, other successful businesses like Microsoft, or even successful bands like the Beatles. He looks at their chronology, looks at their history, and he just kind of goes about answering the question, how did they become successful? Now, many of us have the notion that if you're ambitious, driven, talented, wise, knowledgeable, all these things, your individual efforts, you will be successful. No matter what, you put in the hard work, success comes out at the end. We all have this notion. So Malcolm Gladwell, in his whole book, and he's very upfront about it, challenges us, the reader, on that. If individual effort really does make you successful. So let's start off with someone who he profiles in his book. Bill Joy. Anybody ever heard of Bill Joy? He should come up on the screen right now. Bill Joy, this is him, was raised in Michigan. Anyone from Michigan? All right, cool, we got one person. Awesome. So, Bill Joy, raised in Michigan. Pretty rural town, right outside, actually, the University of Michigan. So, Bill Joy, smart kid, grows up, very interested in math and biology, and plans to attend University of Michigan to study math and biology, somewhere along those lines. He, as you can tell, is a baby boomer, so it comes up in this generation. In the 60s, as he is growing up, as he's in his teens, there's a computer revolution that happens at that time. So in the 60s, this is what computers this is the day when computers took up an entire room. So computers and that should come up actually right now as well. Computers take up an entire room, which you can see here. And this is actually a picture of the IBM System 360, apropos.
Good name.
Yeah, it's an IBM System 360. It's a computer that was probably the most popular computer in the last half of the 1960s. And so prominent businesses would use them. And actually, sorry I did this this is totally me, but the next slide you'll see is a picture of Mad Men. And Mad Men actually does a really good job of showing how important the computer was to businesses in the 1960s. So, but here's the thing about computers at those times, right? They took up an entire room. They were so huge, and they were so ridiculously slow. Because it was like, and I'll kind of, like, I am not a computer science major. I can't adequately probably put this into words, but I'll kind of do my best. So basically, this is how computers did. Computers were very simple. This is how they ran. So you had a punch card. Literally, you had a punch card. Now, if you wanted to program, right? If you wanted to create a program for a computer, if you wanted to make a function for a computer to help you out with your business or whatever, you would literally punch a card, and that was kind of like the language of the computer. You would punch a card, and so people like computer programmers would have these cards, like stacks and stacks of cards, depending on the length of their program. They would punch in, punch, manually, dot, 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 and they would create these, and these had to be like perfect. Like there could be no spelling errors in this language, because if you've had one spelling error, you would have to revise all of your cards that you had. And so you would punch and punch and punch, and then you would take your punch cards and you would give them to the operator of the computer, and that was it. And then like the computer, your program would subsequently then run. Now that was a very lengthy process, and the thing about computers, again, slow. They could only handle one program at a time. And so time on a computer was very expensive, because these hugely large computers were also very expensive. And so if you wanted to rent time to get practice running your program, you couldn't, or it would be incredibly hard. It was like unfeasible for many people. So in the late 60s, some computer programmers found that if you rewrote the operating system of computers, you could actually do what's called a timeshare. So multiple people could use their punch cards, and they could run these programs simultaneously. Now that was a huge revolution, because no longer was a computer just like one person at a time. It was multiple people using this machine. So the programming power of computers like grew exponentially. And so this revolution happens in the 1960s. And it's called time sharing. And many people, many universities to put it in perspective, not many universities in the 1960s had computers. Not many universities that had computers adopted this time sharing system. One of those few universities that adopted this time sharing system was the University of Michigan. So in 1971, Bill Joy enrolls into the University of Michigan. And he is intent on studying biology and math, and realizes, as he moves into the north end of campus, right next to the computer center, that he has a love for computers. And so he begins, and again, this time, this revolution has just happened regarding time sharing. He begins coding or programming nonstop, day in, day out, because he just becomes so fascinated with computers. He becomes so prolific in his practice that he spends day in, day out programming, night and day. And actually, again, this time was shared, right? He finds a loophole in the system of the sharing network, was that he could actually spend nights programming. Like the computer center was open 24/7. Again, something that was not common amongst universities that had computer centers. That he could actually spend all night and all day programming. He said, like, oftentimes you would miss class because you'd just be in the computer center programming. So he graduates in 1975, and he goes to the prestigious University of California at Berkeley to attend grad school for computer engineering or computer science. Again, this is like the heyday of computers. Like, not many people were studying computer science at this time. But he continues practicing and practicing his programming, practicing and practicing. And he becomes so knowledgeable and so smart when it comes to computers that when he goes in for his oral exams and he's questioned by his professors, he comes up with a computer algorithm on the spot, leaving his professors in absolute awe. One of the professors actually said it was witnessing Bill Joy come up with his algorithm on the spot was just like Jesus confounding his elders. So, Bill Joy graduates from the University of California, Berkeley, and he subsequently rewrites what's called Unix. Now, Unix is a computer language. That computer language is still used to this day. If you are a Mac user, like myself, We are not a Mac exclusive church, by the way. If you are a Mac user like myself, Unix is the foundation of your computer. So after rewriting Unix, you're just like, let's do something else. He rewrites Java. Anybody ever heard Java? Another prominent computer language. After that, he's like, you know what? He's become so prolific, so smart and knowledgeable about computers. He co-founds Sun Microsystems in the early 80s. Basically, Sun Microsystems was one of the computer companies, the tech companies at the time, that leads this computer revolution that we see, and even in our current day. So why is Bill Joy so successful? It might seem on the outside that he's very driven. Obviously, spending 24/7 in a computer center could probably you could describe yourself as driven. But if you look very closely, and this is really the thesis of Malcolm Gladwell's book, is that success, for the most part, is not down to individual effort or ambition or drive. It comes down to a set of lucky circumstances that Bill Joy, and this is going to be the phrase I'm going to use a lot, so stick with me. It just so happened. It just so happened that Bill Joy attended the University of Michigan, and it just so happened that the University of Michigan had a computer center. It just so happened that Bill Joy moved right next to the computer center entering his freshman year. It just so happened that the computer center had adopted this revolutionary computer technique called time sharing. It just so happens that he finds a loophole in the system allowing him to stay 24/7 in this computer center. It just so happens that he becomes very knowledgeable. And it just so happens that he finds himself at the top of his game in the early 1970s when no one else was really working on computers. So I began to wonder as I read this book, and it's actually a very popular book, so much so that I had to go to 5 different bookstores to find it. Can we apply this thesis to Solomon and his wisdom? Now, I'm looking at Solomon's success. And I want to make something very clear. Solomon's success is very much guided by his God-given wisdom. That's very important. It's God-given. So Solomon, and again, stick with me, this phrase here, it just so happened. It just so happens that Solomon is the fourth son of David. It just so happens that 2 of his older brothers are killed. It just so happens that his older brother, who has claim to the throne, leads a very unsuccessful campaign to become king. It just so happens that Solomon's mother and the prophet Nathan go to King David and tell them, you must anoint Solomon. It just so happens that in this incredibly not prestigious, not glorious ascension, Solomon becomes king. It just so happens that Solomon, when becoming king, goes to God, and instead of asking what normal kings would ask in that particular circumstance, that God, may you bless me, may you make me rich, may you make me intelligent, may you make me better than my enemies, would you make me the most powerful king ever? He asked for what? He asked for wisdom. It just so happens that the nation of Israel is stationed so well that its trading routes are both land and sea, that they have both a powerful navy and a powerful, I'll say infantry, in regards to camels. It just so happens that in the midst of Solomon becoming this wise king and God giving him everything that he needs, that he is presented with what we now know as one of the most famous court cases ever in the history of the world, with these 2 prostitutes and a baby. And it just so happens that he makes one of the most profound, prominent decisions in the court case ever. And finally, it just so happens that he becomes one of the richest, most intelligent kings we've ever known. So last time when we left off on the chronology that is Solomon's life, we talked about the Queen of Sheba. So the Queen of Sheba arrives in the nation of Israel because Solomon's reputation had gotten so big that everyone had heard about him. Like, it didn't matter what part of that Asia Minor you were, or even in the lower parts of Europe, you had heard about Solomon. And so she comes and she wants to know, is it really true that this king is really, really wise? Is really, really as smart as they say? So she comes, and behold, he is. And so the reputation that he has begins to grow. And the aura that is Solomon, that surrounds Solomon, begins to grow. And everyone wants to meet him. So, 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 23 through 24 record this. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his mind. Solomon was like head and shoulders above any king that had ever existed. And if you look closely at the scriptures, in actually the last half of chapter 10 is solely devoted to just describing the kingdom under Solomon, that he becomes so rich that he has tons of gold, literally weighing tons of gold in his kingdom, that he is so smart that all of his servants that surround him are blessed just by knowing him. His throne is made of ivory. He has gold encrusted into every one of his soldiers has gold encrusted shields and weapons. That everything in his kingdom was either gold or silver or precious stone. So Solomon has become the king. He's become the wisest, richest king we've ever known. What could go wrong? Seriously, what could go wrong? Another book, written by a business consultant named Jim Collins, in his book, it's called How the Mighty Fall. He actually profiles successful businesses, but successful businesses that subsequently fail. And he actually comes up with 5 stages of failure. So stages 1 through 3 describe initial failure, and that's slippery slopes and bad decisions that companies make. And then stages 4 and 5 are basically certain death, that your business is going to fail. And so Solomon becomes so great, so wise, so successful, that a fall is inevitable. It is inevitable. And so we'll just quickly kind of go through these 5 stages as they relate to Solomon. So stage 1 in Jim Collins' book of how businesses fail and characterize is stage 1 is hubris born of success. So businesses that become so successful that they just characterize themselves as successful and have almost like a blind view that they turn away from what initially made them successful. It's they become so arrogant and so driven and motivated that they kind of close off everything that is around them, and they become encapsulated in their own success. And this is what happens to Solomon. And so many scholars argue that when the Queen of Sheba comes to meet Solomon, that this is actually written into the text to show that Solomon has become so wise and so successful that he becomes encapsulated in his own success and his own wisdom. That the way he addresses the Queen of Sheba, the way he interacts with her, just shows that yeah, I'm the man. And so we have that saying, right? Pride comes before the fall. It's pretty much exactly what happens to Solomon. So if you're in stage 1, this happens to businesses. It happens to us as people. We become successful. We can brag a little bit here and there. That's cool. No one's gonna say anything. But stage 2, in Jim Collins' book, is characterized as the undisciplined pursuit of more. So I've just described, Solomon becomes so rich and successful and wise that he actually begins just marrying literally everyone. I think he has 700 wives, he has 300 concubines, he has the world at his fingertips, and he just becomes driven to accumulate more. And he begins to accumulate more and more than is actually necessary to his kingdom. And he's actually violating the commandments that God had originally given to Moses back in Deuteronomy of like, don't marry too much, don't accumulate too much, because this will come in between us. And so Solomon is well into stage 2 in the midst of chapter 10 of 1 Kings. Now stage 3 is called denial of risk and peril. So businesses that hit stage 3 will never admit that they are failing. They will never admit that they're in the red. They'll never admit anything because they're incredibly arrogant. They are stretching beyond their means. They have lost sight of what has originally gotten them successful. And this is exactly where Solomon finds himself in the beginning of chapter 11 of 1 Kings. See, God had advised Solomon twice, not once, but twice. Be careful, because your wealth and your wisdom and your success is coming in between us. So Solomon began to marry much. And God advised, don't marry too many foreign wives, because if you marry many women and marry many foreigners, their gods will come in between us. You will begin to become an idolater. You'll begin to not have the relationship that we initially had when you first became king. And so you see a very, very much dichotomy in the beginnings of Solomon's kingdom and in the endings. So, and actually in chapter 11, verse 2, it records that God gives a straight command to Solomon that you shall not enter into marriage with them, meaning his foreign wives, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn your heart after their gods. And Solomon clung to these in love. He clung to his wives. Like the scriptures there actually refer directly back. The word clung is in the original language, that the original commands that God gave to Moses back in Deuteronomy. It's the same language. That your heart will be moved away from me. That you will no longer have a heart after me, you will have a heart after something else. And so, at the beginning of chapter 11, Solomon is well into stage 3. That he is like, his relationship with God and his relationship, his relationship with God has just become so separated. That he is no longer the king that God had initially had, that he became different. And so, it's recorded in verses 9 through 10 that the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and commanded him concerning these things, that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. That's stage 3. Stage 4, grasping for salvation. See, after God has warned Solomon that you become so rich and so successful that you are no longer relying on me, you're relying on yourself, that something's going to happen, that I will raise up enemies against you. And so this is exactly what happens in the last half of chapter 11, that 3 prominent enemies rise up against Solomon, that his kingdom, and God warns him and tells him that at the end of your reign, when you go to sleep with your fathers, your kingdom will be split. The tribes of Israel will be split from the original 12, that you, luckily your descendant, your heir apparent, will hold on to one tribe while your enemies get the rest. And so God fractures Solomon's kingdom towards the end of his reign, and Solomon and just the hopes of like trying to maintain his kingdom, attempts to assassinate the most prominent of his enemies and completely fails. And finally, at the end of chapter 11, we see Solomon well into stage 5, which is the capitulation to irrelevance or death. That Solomon's kingdom has completely deteriorated. This massive kingdom, this unified kingdom, the age of prosperity that Israel had never seen before, was completely gone because their king, who was initially so wise, had become so self-reliant on himself that his relationship with God no longer was in the picture. That he is fundamentally moved away from the heart of God. And so finally we see in that original verse that Solomon goes to sleep with his fathers and his son takes his place. William Stanford, a professor of the Old Testament at Fuller Seminary, says regarding Solomon's reign as king, that Solomon's reign can be evaluated politically and spiritually. Politically, it is splendid. Spiritually, it deteriorates into idolatry. For some strange reasons, Christian literature has idealized Solomon so that he hardly resembles the scriptural portrayal. That we often forget that Solomon, who was so wise, deteriorates. His demise begins and it's categorized. And that even, and if you were to take anything away from this entire talk, that even if you are the most wise, like if you are the wisest man that has ever lived, even you will make the most human of errors, and that is to become self-reliant and to forget what initially brought you to that success. See, Gladwell states in his book that is many people become successful through circumstance, through lucky breaks. And in Solomon's case, he had become successful through God-given wisdom. He had become successful because God had made it so. But Solomon forgets. And even the most wisest man can drop down into oblivion. I actually want to be a motivational speaker. I feel that the aura right now is so positive and everybody's very happy. And actually, I mean, like for the most part, yeah, it's pretty sad. Solomon does demise. He has his demise. And so actually I want to bring you to Ecclesiastes 1, verses 12 through 18. So we'd like to turn there now. You may. And it says in the scripture, I, the preacher, have been king over all Israel in Jerusalem. And I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Now, under heaven is an important phrase, because under heaven means, and this is like the symbology that is used in Ecclesiastes, that under heaven is everything that is outside of God. So I have sought wisdom outside of God. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is under the sun, again, the same language that is used under heaven. And behold, all is vanity, a striving after the wind. So ultimately, outside of God, outside of the relationship that you have with God, it's all meaningless. It's all irrelevant. It's all actually very temporary. All is vanity. The word vanity means temporary. It means fleeting. It means it's going to go away. And striving after the wind is just an effort that in the end means absolutely nothing. Verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly, and I perceived that it is also but a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases in knowledge increases in sorrow. So many people actually don't, it's actually recorded that that the original writing of Ecclesiastes, though it appears to be Solomon, he might actually not be the author of this book. That the author of the book uses Solomon as a literary foil, that he tells the story of Solomon through Solomon's eyes, because Imagine the wisest king you'd ever known, and you see his demise. What can you take away from it? And so the author of Ecclesiastes is basically telling the reader that outside of your relationship with God, everything is meaningless. Even wisdom, one of the most sought after talents, is meaningless because it is only with God, it is only through him that we experience actual enrichment. We experience that life is meaningful, it is not meaningless. It is only through your relationship with God that life is beautiful, that life is great. And so, many of you find yourselves in this room right now at this particular time, and I believe because many of you are successful. Many of you have done great things so far, and will continue to do great things following this. And actually, like it's something Earl and I have discussed. Like, how do we talk about failure to an audience that doesn't experience it very often? Many of you have been incredibly successful, and so we've actually always viewed this church as a launching pad. And it's not because, and I'll make this incredibly crystal clear, it is not because we ourselves believe that this church has power to guide you the rest of your life, to make you become successful. No, it is not the church itself. It is the Spirit that empowers this church. It is God that will make you successful, and it will give you talents. And the bigger picture I'm getting at, it's in the end, it's not just about Solomon's wisdom. It's about the gift that God had given him through wisdom, and that God gives gifts to everyone, that he gives gifts to you right here, right now. And many of you find yourselves here in this room because you've been given a gift. And so, and I'll conclude in just a bit, but as the worship team comes up and the prayer team will be to the left and right of your aisles, we actually just want to pray for you right now. That if you need a gift from God, that you need wisdom in your life, just like Solomon did. If you need a particular gift that is necessary, that we'll pray for you for it. That we will see that God makes you successful, because success in the end is due to the hand of God working in your life. That you've submitted yourself to God, and that you are with him, and that you love him, and that you've not forgotten who has brought you this far. Let's just pray. Lord, we just thank you for this morning, the time you've given us to be with you. And I just pray for all my friends in this room. And I thank you for everything that you've done in their lives up to this point. And Lord, I just know that you're working mightily in them right now. That you are empowering them to do great things. That you are using them as your vessels to bring light and love and peace and joy and every other gift of the Spirit into this world. That you are with them and that you love them. So I just pray for my friends. I pray right now that as we enter into a time of worship, that they would draw closer to you. That they would not forget that it has been you who has been with them all the way. And I pray that against Solomon's folly, that they would continue to realize that it is through you that their success is possible. It is you that is through you that they will see great things happen in their lives. So I just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. You may stand at this moment. We'll take communion in a bit. Earl will lead that. And if you need prayer, again, there'll be people at the left and right of your aisles to be praying with you.